a little notification, which you just say, okay, I got that. Sorry to break up that kind of moment, but I had forgotten to record. So we have talked about mind state, the general flavor of what's going on in your life over a long period of time and how that interacts with your interactions. We've talked about breath, where you're feeling your breath in this moment, where in the body, is it shallow, is it deep? And now we're talking about how the body feels right now. So we talked about the breath having a center, a feeling of center somewhere in the body. Maybe bring your attention to that place in your body where you located that center of breath. For me, I'm feeling it right here at the sternum. And that breath that I just took was an indication to me of starting to relax, starting to let go. Is there a pain or an area that you're holding? Is there an area of pain? If you bring your awareness to your whole body, where do you feel a little restriction, a little pain? Is there an area of tightness? And maybe even, are different parts of your body feeling more expansive than others? Sometimes we experience lack of sensation as opposed to sensation. I find it helpful to imagine color. I imagine my body being colored with experience. Right side and left side may feel different. Maybe you have kind of a muddy color one place, or an area of red in another place. So once we have these awarenesses of the breath and the body, these awarenesses of areas of restriction, maybe some discomfort, holding, we can take those areas and we can ask the next question, which is, what is the feeling of this area? Dana pointed out that there are like different parts of her that are fighting for attention. Everybody has something like that going on in their body at any given moment. We just don't tune into it. So go to that place that had that discomfort. Maybe it had a color that you associate with being ill at ease. And have a conversation with that area of your body. A conversation that starts with listening. You can ask that area of discomfort, restriction, that kind of funky color. An open-ended question, like what do you have to say to me? Or even, how are you feeling right now? You might get actual words. You might get a picture. So tune into that area and ask it what it wants to tell you. Now, this is not necessarily a place here where we're going to go into depth with those feelings. But what you can do is to take the response that you get from your body. You can write it down. You can keep it in your mind. You can journal about it. I like to take my non-dominant hand after I've asked a question of my body, or that particular area of my body that's holding these feelings. And I, with my left hand, non-dominant hand, I write an open-ended question like, what do you have to say to me? What can I do for you? How are you feeling? Something like that. And then I write the response with that left hand. It's kind of a pain because the writing is hard to read and etc. But by doing that, you're accessing your subconscious mind. You're accessing that non-verbal part, and you're giving it words so that you can understand what it has to say. Because so often our feelings come in the form of reaction to input. They don't always express themselves clearly. They don't say, darn it, I'm feeling sad right now, or I'm so angry, or I'm feeling abandoned. It's often only when we tune in and allow that nonverbal subconscious part of the mind, body mind, and to give it words that it can express itself in ways that we can understand and kind of grok. So, was that feeling energized and alert? Was it depressed or sad? Just get a sense. So we've talked about, or we've learned about the mind state, the breath, the body, and the feelings. And the question we ask ourselves for each one of those areas is, what's going on? What's up? We're literally tuning in with ourselves. So when we do that, we have a chance of listening well to somebody else, because we have listened well to ourselves. And we've given ourselves that gift of being present with ourself, which is something that we don't often do. So before I go on to the next area of what I'm presenting, I'd like everyone to let me know what came up for you, if you would like to share, or if you have any questions or thoughts you'd like to share. And you can just unmute yourself and say what you need to say. And if there are no questions or nobody was interested in sharing, then we can go on.
I'd like to just share something. It was my feet, especially the bottom of my feet, that were gray in color and felt like they're holding the weight of all my troubles and sorrows and burdens. And my feet seemed to want me to take a step, take a chance, take a risk.
Mm.
And they're very jumpy right now. And I'm scared. I'm reacting to it by being scared.
All right.
So that's what my feet had to say.
Well, Connie, that's great. That's great that you could hear. How does it feel to give voice to your feet?
Pretty powerful, actually. It feels like I am stating my truth for this moment.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
That's great. Dana, did you have something you wanted to say?
I wanted to thank you for the instruction to ask the open-ended question. And it's more like, and it's a caring question, like, what do you want of me? What can I do for you? That's really helpful in the non-dominant hand. I haven't done that. I have been doing something kind of similar with focusing. And if I draw, like, especially with crayons, then I'm always kind of amazed at what happens. Yeah, so that helps me not like respond with conditioning that's in my head, but it's something fresh, right? Something young, very young too. Yeah.
Yes, right. And again, it's drawing is nonverbal generally. So you're dealing with color and form and texture, all of which, you know, we can describe them, but the actual putting it on paper is the most powerful expression of that. Thank you. So, when we are headed into that conversation, we have some tools of self-awareness, mind state, breath, body, and feelings, what's going on. It takes practice in the moment where you know, someone says, someone who's difficult, you know, we're really talking about difficult folks. They're not difficult themselves, but we perceive them as difficult because they push something, they trigger something in us. So I apologize to the difficult people. I'm calling them difficult, just for a categorization of how we interact with them. So we have these 4 tools that allow us to tune in, and difficult means things come up, right? Difficult doesn't mean, oh, totally relaxed, peaceful, calm, talking about politics, the healthcare system, you know, whatever it is that pushes your buttons. It pushes the button and the button says, activate. And so in order to hold that awareness of I am activated, I am triggered, we balance it with the breath, the mind state, the feelings, and the body awareness to start with. And Please practice. Please practice just tuning in. Tuning in when you're talking to your beloved, easygoing person. Tuning in when you're interacting with your animal friends, your plant friends. How do you feel in your body? It's just constant practice. And luckily our breath is constant. Even when we hold it, there's a point where we can't do that anymore. So when you are outside communing with nature, when you're petting your kitty cat, when you're talking to your grandson or your beloved person with whom you don't really have a lot of anxiety, practice there. Because when we practice where it's easy, it creates neural pathways that are easier and have better connotations. And then when we take that kind of positive vehicle of experience into a difficult situation, we have a little bit of a grounding from whence we can work and listen well. Part of that grounding comes in creating a safe space. So when we talk about a safe space, we may be entering a physical space that does not feel safe. It may not feel safe because maybe it's physically not safe, but generally speaking, it feels unsafe because that difficult person is there. And we enter in and we say, oh no, here it comes. She's gonna say that stuff again, or maybe she's hurt me in the past and maybe I'm afraid she will hurt me again. Or maybe he is going to, maybe he actually, or this person has a kind of presence that precedes them, that an energy field that takes up the room. And you may not feel you have space to be in that room because that person has that kind of presence. And oftentimes when somebody is frightened, they will create that kind of, that presence that says, I'm going to attack you first so that you do not have a chance to attack me because I'm really scared. That's my experience. The people with the most bravado are the people who are, trembling inside, and they feel so unsafe. So by making a safe place for ourselves, we are creating a safe place for them as well. And it's a place we create from strength, not from fear. I will share a tiny story. My husband is a meditator, and he really loves to meditate, and he has a kind of interesting role in our family. When Paul, my husband, is in the room and he's closing his eyes and someone else is talking, we think, oh, there he is meditating again. Well, that's a good thing. So in this particular instance, my mother, who at that time had a lot of health problems, she was dying, basically. She didn't have a lot of time left to live, and she was not happy about it. And so she was taking it out on my father, who was there in the room. She was ranting and raving and yelling and saying, he does this and he does that, and rah, 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 and we were all just aghast. My husband knelt down on the floor in meditation posture, and I noticed he was just breathing. My mom went from yelling to, she kind of petered out. She went, and he does this, and he does that, and well, and I just, oh, I mean, it was literally like that. It was like he was filling the space with flowers, and she wasn't speaking in flowers. She was speaking in difficult language, but that language could not coexist with the flowers. That's kind of how I look at it. So he was able to, he loves my mother very much. He was able to occupy that space of love. And her vitriol could not survive in it. So, here is Karen. So, so in creating a safe space, you know, we just can't listen well to others if we feel unsafe. Welcome, Karen. Karen, if you would mute yourself, please. Thank you. So what I do in order to create a safe space for a positive conversation is I do the work ahead of time to create an energy buddy to come with me. Because, you know, sometimes if we feel like we're entering a situation that's difficult, we say, hey, Dana, could you come with me to my friend's house? I don't really feel real safe there. And Dana says, yes, I'll come with you. And so she's my buddy. Sometimes Dana's not available. So we need to create, or we can create, an energy buddy, a symbolic buddy. This buddy needs to be somebody who symbolizes unconditional love for you. This buddy can be an actual person, the Dalai Lama, Thich Nhat Hanh, your spouse, etc. Oftentimes, though, spouses and children, they come with some strings, depending on your relationship. So choose a person, an actual person, a fictional person, Mark Twain, a person you conjure up, or consider an animal. So my buddy that I created in a therapy session is Basha, the dog. Basha was a wonderful black and white, ultra fluffy Buddha kind of dog who lived with us for many years, and she symbolized for me, and still does, this kind of presence that is strong, wise, really fluffy, so comforting, and very loving. So she could bring her love to bear on me, and she can bring her love to bear on that other person, the difficult person we're trying to work with. Another thing to think about is perhaps nature, an energy buddy who is a stem of wheat, an energy buddy who is a tree or a mountain. So play with it and have fun. Get out your crayons or your paints and paint a picture of your energy buddy. If that helps you, do that to make it more real, more visceral. And then when you are practicing, as we were talking about before, when you're practicing bringing in an awareness of your mind state, your breath, your body, your feelings, what's up here? Invoke the presence of Basha, or the tree, or the Dalai Lama, or Kuan Yin. Invoke the presence of that mountain and feel what happens in your body, what happens to your breath. If we take a moment here, and if you have an inkling of who that energy buddy may be for you, maybe you're visualizing that entity, then tune in again. That entity is beside you, or maybe even within you, maybe lives in your heart, maybe lives in a part of your body. Has anything changed? You know, we did that exercise of tuning into the body and body scan, and we found some areas that were a little bit restricted, maybe. So what happens to that area of restriction when the energy buddy is present in your mind? Does anything change? Does it get softer? Does it get a little easier? Yeah, so at different moments in my life, Basha has been the real entity that has, the being that has helped me most. At one point, it was literally a stem of wheat. I thought about the stem of wheat, you know, it has that lovely kind of geometry that comes out like that. And I just felt great. I felt at ease, connected to nature, a part of nature. It was really stunning for me that a little stem of wheat could have that, give me that experience. So the last thing I want to talk about before we take a little break is what it means to be present with your conversation partner. So I'm actually going to open this up to the group of folks because I've been talking a lot. And I would be interested to know what you think it means to be present. We've talked about being present to ourselves, but what's it like to be present for someone else, to someone else? So as the spirit moves you, please unmute and share what you think.
Would imagine that being present, it seems, in my experience, it's to bring quietness to myself and really look at the person's body, positions, face. Are the eyes looking another direction? I can tune my breathing to their pace. And sometimes for me, it's just asking a lot of questions about what's happening or what I connected with them the last time, something that was a topic that we had the last time we communicated. And not get real direct and just go, what's going on? It's more like ask around it, you know.
So don't be so direct. You're saying to be really present, maybe, if I hear you right, instead of just going in
Yeah.
for that and being very direct, which I do as well, to soften around what you're wondering about, or what that kind of thorn was last time. Instead of saying, hey, let's talk about that thorn, you would talk around it. You would talk, how would you talk around it, Connie?
I would mention it in some kind of muted way.
Hmm.
Um, and contribute my feelings about where I'm at with that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, maybe come from more of a curious place. Where have you thought about it? Do you think there's more you want to tell me about that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, curious. You are curious to know what they're
Um,
thinking.
yeah, I'm curious to know what's going on with that right now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Where do you stand? And maybe ask you, do you still feel that it's blah blah blah? You know,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
is it still at that stage? Is it at that point? Do you think there's any other way? Have you considered anything that I said about it?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's interesting to me because you are, by being curious, you are showing interest in and maybe even love toward that person. You may not feel very loving at the time, but maybe they would, some part of them would recognize that as love, that you care to know what they think. And then you also say, do you care to know what I think? Yeah.
And you know, there's definitely fear that I'm feeling just talking about this. And you know, at the bottom of my spine, I can feel this yikes. And how can I tread lightly?
Mm-hmm. Well, I encourage you to bring your energy buddy, if you have recognized them, into the bottom of your spine right now. Because let's just call a spade a spade. It's hard to talk about hard conversations because there's so much emotional content. So let's be gentle with ourselves in this workshop, knowing that we are making ourselves vulnerable to each other and, to ourselves even. So thank you, Connie. Does anyone else want to share what they feel being present means or looks like? Dana, yeah.
I just want to say thank you, Connie. That was beautiful. And you asked that question, how can I tread lightly? And I need to get that tattooed on my forearm, like really, I mean, because I think gentleness is key. And you're a very gentle person, and it just comes across in how you do everything. So yeah, I think when someone pushes my buttons, my gentleness can disappear very quickly. Yeah. But anyway, the only thing I wanted to add is I have a family member who often tells the same stories over and over and over,
Mm,
and it's not a dementia thing. And so I want to be present, but sometimes I start getting X's for eyes, like that story again. And so through something Thich Nhat Hanh said, but I can't remember now. It was sort of like, well, maybe the question to ask is, why is she needing to tell me that story right now in this moment? And then it becomes very fresh. And then I just wonder, and I often but just my wondering helps me to listen. And it's a kind of a listening between the lines, because the text is known, but I think we very often, like Connie was saying, like body language, tone of voice, everything they're doing. I mean, most of the information when talking with a human being, or I think maybe is not in the words themselves.
I really like that, listening between the lines. So I find that being present does require that curiosity and kindness. And my reaction when I'm trying to protect myself in a difficult situation is not to be vulnerable. It's not to be gentle. My reaction is to put a wall up, be in control, use my experience as a listener, kind of almost, I don't want to say a weapon, but as a tool to gain control. So instead of really listening, my non-skillful reaction might be to say, oh, so what you're really saying is this and this and this, and and I know what's going on in your mind, basically. So I love the curiosity piece, and I love the gentleness piece, because we can be in a state of safety and groundedness and allow that person to be who they are. And also not realize that I don't know. I can be in that state of not knowing, which allows in so much more information, not knowing. If you already have determined that this person has a Make America Great Again hat on, and that makes them this, 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 and this, already. Why have a conversation? So rather than that, I can say, I wonder why that person has this hat on. That's interesting. And for me, the words "I wonder," "that's interesting," those are helpful for me. And also the reminder, reminding myself to let that person be who they are, whoever that is really crucial as well. So listening means also the very obvious, which is turn off your cell phone, turn away from your computer. It's obvious, right? However, when my son comes in the room, and he's always sharing with me, he's a writer, he's a creative writer, he has fantasy novels in his head, and he wants to share them with me. And yeah, I'm his mom, I want to hear this stuff, but I also have this email to send, and I also have this other thing I'm thinking about at the same time. I'm like, yeah. That's not being present. So I'm training myself to, when Harry comes down the stairs and he's got something on his mind and he wants to share, I close my computer, I turn, and I'm there. I watch his face. Connie was talking about body language. What's his body language like? What's my body language like? We all have distractions. The nature of the human mind is, you've heard the monkey mind, the nature is to go, blah, 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 blah. So we're not going to overcome that necessarily, but we can let the mind know that we are listening to what it has to say. And right now, it's trying to help. It's trying to help us stay on task with those emails. It's trying to help us with whatever thoughts are coming up in the mind. It's very sweet. It's trying to help us run our life. That's nice. However, right now, I know that I need to listen to Harry. So what I tell my mind is, yes, I understand that you want me to finish that email. I have time after this conversation. I put it kind of in a basket. It's a basket that I call the later basket. So when I am able to take those thoughts that are bombarding my mind, trying to help me out, and I give them the attention in that tiny moment, I say, I hear you. Here's the basket. I will take care of you later. I have time later. I don't have time now. I've got this conversation here going on. That helps me. Because then you're not fighting against your mind. You're not saying, stop it, stop it. You're saying, yes, I hear you. It's almost like saying to a child, Mommy's busy right now. Not that this works all the time, right? Anyone who's had children knows. Mommy is busy right now. Mommy will get back to you in 5 minutes. It's not a great example because children have no concept of time and they don't have a lot of patience, but your thoughts do, you do. And so go ahead and put those thoughts in a basket for later. Turn your body to the person you're listening to and tune into your body, your mind, your thoughts, your feelings, and then you can hear their words much better. I like to remember something I read not too long ago, that when we listen to our partner, we need to remember to listen to them as if what they are saying is the most important thing in the world right now. They have something so important to tell us. And also, like it's the last time you'll ever see this person. So for me, that's the big wake-up call. I kind of, in order to be truly present, I can kill myself off in my mind. I say, oop, I'm going to get hit by a semi tomorrow. This is the day I have left. Or I killed the other person off. I never tell them this, of course. What if this were the last time I would be listening to my son? Wouldn't I wish that I had listened? So, on that uplifting note, I'm going to open this up one more time, see if there are any comments before we take a break. And if not, we're going to take, I think, a 10 or 15 minute break. We'll take a poll and see. So that is my body-centered presentation. Thank you for listening. And are there any thoughts? Nice doggy, Dana. I like your doggy in the background there.
Thank you. I just wanted to say thank you. That the basket is really helpful, and like when I'm meditating, often, what do you do with thoughts, right? And you don't want to suppress. You don't want to. So I don't know. I always think in terms of like metaphor. So like basket, that really helps me.
Mm-hmm.
So I came up with this thing of like cooking on the stove. So you have, like say you're cooking pasta sauce, something else, right? And so there's something on high heat that's on you put that on the front burner that takes a lot of stirring. but then there's other things that you can put to simmer on the back burner. So if I say a thought, okay, you're still there, I'm going to put you to simmer on the back burner and I'll come back, you know, and thank you and for being there. And so it's our kind of like, if you think about theater, there's the, you know, the actor at the front of the stage, but then there's other actors who are also important that are there, but they're kind of at the, you know, the back of the stage.
Wow, those are all great visualizations. Yeah, I like that. And we can come up with other ones as well. Connie.
Yeah, I really appreciated your mentioning that what if this is the last time we're going to see each other? Do I want, I'll think back and like, was that the last thing I said or what, you know, I don't want that. And so it's helpful when I think about it. It's like, this is precious. This moment is precious. And yes, I want to give this the time it needs. Thanks for that.
Yes, you're welcome. You're welcome. Adam and Fitzhugh, you've been there. Wondering if you have any thoughts about the body aspect, and maybe you'll be getting into this later as well. But wondered if you had some thoughts about this.
Happy to let Adam speak as well, but first, thank you, as Dana and Connie have both shared already. Thank you very much for the analogies and the practices as well. We will, I think, begin again after our break with some kind of resettling into the body, so that is a thread for all of us here today. Something that's clear. It may be clear in our consciousness, but it's certainly become clear as we process through a very difficult number of years as a country, that a lot of what we say and experience together is coming from subconscious experience of the nervous system, right? And how we experience those of other backgrounds, those of other politics inside of our family. We aren't making intentional decisions to respond the way that we do. And so it's crucial to be very curious about and listening to our bellies, our hearts, our throats, and so on, as we engage, before we engage, and so on. So yeah, thank you again for that, and we'll definitely touch on some of this. Maybe Adam has some words as well.
No, I've appreciated this a lot, and very practical too, so helpful, just these kind of simple instructions of orienting ourselves towards another person. And like Fitzhugh just shared, I think there is so much we're learning about the embodied dimension of our relational field. The one thing maybe I'd add is that I know that many of us have a model of our own mind and perceptions that we still think we're basically a brain. And I think what you're bringing out, Christina, is that even when we're listening, it's bodily, right? This comes from a basic phenomenological perspective, that if you hear a sound that's disturbing or threatening, your whole body turns in that direction, right? If you look at your dog or your cat, if there's a sound, their ears twitch and move and orient. And so hearing isn't just and listening isn't just with our brains or even just our ears, but it's this full embodied relationship with other people around us and with the ecosystem around us. So I appreciate your widening that perspective. Yeah, and we'll get into more of this. Yeah, thanks everyone. Great to hear your comments on presence.
So how long of a break do we feel we would like to take? 10, 15? Short, long? Is 10 minutes adequate?
I'm going to maybe recommend a 10-minute break if that sounds good
Okay.
for other folks. And yeah, because Christina has opened up the space so gracefully, and we've already been in conversation together. Just uh, an ask to not go into email, to not go into work. Obviously, if conversations with other folks in the household need to happen, then that's part of listening. But just a sense that we've already entered in, we're already settling, and let's do our best to continue and carry that through, so that when we arrive back together at the half-hour mark, that we're kind of seamlessly back together, that we're
Thank you.
ready to work again.
That's great, Fitzhugh. Great.
Does 10
Great
minutes sound
advice.
good?
Yeah,
I saw
yeah.
some nodding, but
That's good.
just to double check. Okay, great.
All right, so we'll see you back here at 11:30 our time here in the Colorado Mountains.
All right, thank you. An hour and a half together. So first of all, I think we'll sit briefly and almost repeat what Christina offered earlier, so that we can go a bit more deeply with it and open into a presentation about listening that Adam will offer. We'll have some time together to kind of journal and explore what feels blocked for us and what we are working with around listening. And at around the hour mark, or after an hour of that, we'll move from a kind of how, which we've been thinking about already quite a lot, into a question around what. What are we listening to? That question, Adam and I kind of presenting or riffing, all of us riffing together, will take up the remainder of our time together, and we will likely end around 1 Mountain Time, so maybe an hour earlier than we expected. And if we get the sense, probably as a group, that we're going to go a little beyond that, we'll negotiate that as a small group and see what feels comfortable for people. So that's the roadmap for the next little spell together, and Adam and I will kind of touch back in with that as we go, so that hopefully it continues to feel as though it's a good process, and to let us all know where we are in it. Great. So having said that, I want to invite us back into the body mind as though we left. And we may feel a sense of softening, we may feel a kind of gravity. There may be a sense of these kinds of exhalations, right? Kind of breathing out, allowing the body to relax. This is an animal thing we do, right? We sigh, we breathe out heavily when it's safe to settle. And so in conversation with this breath, as Christina pointed out earlier, let's just see what's happening. Curious about it. Is it deep, shallow? Does it go all the way down into the belly? Is it happening in the chest? Is it happening in the throat? How wide is it? What is its temperature? Does it feel soft? Does it feel rough? How does the body move in relationship to the breath? Does the belly expand? Do the ribs expand? What's contracting? What feels open? What feels closed? Sometimes there aren't answers to these questions. And so our curiosity can actually deepen. If the breath were allowed to open up into a greater sense of body awareness, as Connie mentioned earlier, of the limbs, muscles, what would we feel there? Something calling our attention, does something need care? How can we listen to that? How can we listen to that important ask? And renew ourselves in that care. Through attention, through listening, through curiosity, through love. Love for anxiety in the belly, love for excitement in the throat, love for the way in which our feet and our palms ground us, whatever it may be for you. Inside this space of care and curiosity, love, appreciation for the body, and the way in which it shows and holds emotions so beautifully, I want to ask a question. This is a question that I don't expect to be answered today for any of us. Maybe it's something we take forward, each of us individually or as a group. What is the most challenging thing for us to listen to in our lives? What is most challenging for us to listen to in our lives? And kind of let this land, let the ripples of this question expand and settle. And as ever with a question like this, there can be a well then why? If there's an apparent answer or something immediately clear to us, then maybe a follow-up is why? What is most challenging for us to listen to in our lives and why? From this why, I want to invite Adam to introduce us to 4 levels of listening.
Thank you so much, Fitzhugh. How's everyone doing? after that. Still holding that powerful question. And we can just allow that to be there for us, including our response to that potent question that Fitzhugh asked. And we'll let it stay with us for the next period of time. What I'd like to do is just begin a little bit by praising listening. Listening is very profound, and it goes very deep. I found an interesting passage in the Shurangama Sutra, Mahayana Sutra, and Manjushri, the Bodhisattva of wisdom, says, "I now submit to the world-honored one that all Buddhas in this world appear to teach the most appropriate method, which consists in using all-pervasive sound. The state of samadhi can be realized by means of listening. Thus was Avalokiteshvara freed from suffering. O you who have achieved the sound profound, the seer of sound, the purifier, who, unfailing as the sound of ocean tides, saves all beings in the world and makes them secure, reverently I declare to the Tathagata what Avalokiteshvara said. When one dwells in quietude, rolls of drums from 10 directions simultaneously are heard, so hearing is complete and perfect. The eyes cannot pierce a screen, neither can the mouth or the nose. Body only feels when it is touched. Mind's thoughts are confused or unconnected, but voice and sound, whether near or far, at all times can be heard. The five other sense organs are not perfect, but hearing, listening, really is pervasive. The presence or absence of sound and voice is registered by the ear as is or is not. Absence of sounds means nothingness heard. Not hearing, devoid of nature. Absence of sound is not the end of hearing, and sound, when present, is not its beginning. This capacity of listening, beyond creation and annihilation, truly is permanent. Even when isolated thoughts in a dream arise, though the thinking process stops, hearing does not end. For the capacity, the faculty of hearing is beyond all thought, beyond both mind and body. So I want to evoke something pervasive and amazing about listening. Listening as a gift that we've been given through our body, our ears, this capacity to listen. Listening as something intersubjective or social, that we learn to listen through relationships and through, mothers and fathers and aunties and parents and friends. We learn to listen through birdsong. We learn to listen through beautiful music and painful screeching sounds. So there's something we're always pervaded by this listening, and yet that gift, that capacity to listen, is something that we can cultivate, something that we can actually learn to deepen and expand, or to contract, to close down, to close off. So there's always this ever-present potential to open a vastness of listening, a depth of listening, or to kind of shrink it down and narrow it, constrict and constrain this pervasive capacity to listen. And within our contemporary politics, within painful relationships, within the attention economy, within a media and technologies that often attack this vastness of listening, there's even more of a call and an opportunity to cultivate this vastness of listening. So what I want to present is one of the most interesting descriptions of listening that I've ever heard. It comes from Otto Scharmer, who developed the Presencing Institute and the theory U that maybe some of you have heard of. He is a researcher from MIT and has developed a very interesting understanding of how human beings, systems, and organizations transform in a deep way. And one of the methods that he uses to really guide us into this deep transformation are what he calls 4 levels of listening. And so I'm basically taking this directly from Otto Scharmer, maybe with some of my own interpretations. So the first level of listening, he calls listening from our habits. Listening from our habits, or listening from within our, what he calls downloading, which is like being within a cocoon, being within an armored, habitual perspective. And unfortunately, I think a lot of us listen from here. And this type of listening is basically not listening. You're just so within the movements of your mind. Connie earlier was talking about how being present with someone also means an inner silence or stillness to be able to listen. And so here, instead of that inner silence or stillness, our mind is really moving fast. And basically, I think my experience of this is the way you listen to someone is you're listening just to wait for them to shut up. Like, when are they going to stop talking so I can talk, so I can say what I think or give them advice? And it's almost, we can almost completely blank out and not listen. We barely hear anything. And sometimes it's very embarrassing to recognize how often we listen from within almost total distraction and didn't hear much at all. My son, I have a 9-year-old, and he often will just catch me like, "Dad, you didn't hear anything I just said, did you?" Yeah, you're right. Sometimes it's obvious because a text came in on my phone or I'm just visibly distracted, but sometimes he can feel there's a kind of vacancy, even though he's talking to me. And he's right. I'm distracted. Something else is my priority. And for a 9-year-old to feel that from their own father, that's hard. That's painful. That will impress upon him something. And certainly in my experience of working with many people and couples and relationships, I think many marriages, many long-term relationships fall apart because of our inability to listen, that we listen from within this obscured, habitual, distracted perspective. So this is this first level of listening that unfortunately is probably familiar to all of us. The next level of listening is more like listening on the edge of our habits, or on the kind of barrier between ourself and the rest of the world, or the edge of this cocoon that we might stay within. Listening from this edge. Now, this is particularly important to some of the themes that Dana brought up around other political perspectives that I know is on our minds, and as Christina has brought up. This is a form of listening where we actually are really listening to the other person. We really are hearing what they're saying, but we're really listening, just sorting, kind of discriminating. Do they line up with what I already believe and agree with? Are they confirming my habits, assumptions, and worldview, myself? Or are they, we're listening for disconfirming data, difference. We're listening for they saying the wrong thing, or it's a perspective that I don't like or I would want to critique. So this is a kind of analytical listening, where we bring our intellect, our intelligence, sometimes our passionate emotions, but we're not really open to this other person or group of people. We're just determining, do they line up with what I already believe? Do they sync up with those habits? So this is confirming or disconfirming, noticing differences. It's a debating kind of way of listening, ready to jump in and say no, or yes, you're right. Sometimes part of this form of listening, especially those of us who are in the helping professions or think of ourselves as spiritual or therapists or something, this mode of listening can take the form of basically we're waiting to jump in and give advice. And I find this is actually quite sad and pervasive in our little corner of the world, where we're pretty much just listening to be able to say, oh, that reminds me of this book that I read. Let me tell you about chapter 3. It changed my life, or we're waiting to share this news report that we heard about what the truth is. So we're sorting and then kind of strategic, looking for when we can add our perspective. But we are really listening here in the second stage of listening. We're not distracted. So that's the difference between the first level of listening and the second. Here we are hearing, but we're sorting. We're discriminating. And sometimes this is a good way to listen. Sometimes this is helpful. Academia is based on this mode of listening. That if you go to any academic conference or panel, all of the scholars are in the audience just waiting to pounce on the little kind of critique to offer to somebody. Any of you who've been in universities know this. The third mode of listening is empathic listening. Empathic listening, where we've stepped outside of this habitual cocoon. We've gone beyond even the edge of listening for confirming data or disconfirming data. And now we're really connecting with another person. That the listening itself is happening from a vast field beyond the self, the ego, our habits, our distractions. Maybe just to pause for a moment, have you ever listened to someone like this? Or felt listened to with real empathy? Where that same kind of attention that Christina was talking about, and the gaze, your bodily perception, the stillness that Connie was mentioning, that all of these qualities, almost the healing quality, also that Dana was mentioning earlier of a healing of these different parts at war with ourself, all of that has kind of settled, and we're really just attuned. I know from working with individuals, I have a kind of spiritual counseling practice, that I can really tell something about my state of being, whether I'm able to listen to someone or not. And there are times when a friend or a student will come and be working with me, and I'm a little impatient. I'm trying to fix them or something. And that itself is a little sign to me, okay, what would happen if I just listen? And there is almost a surrender, almost a spiritual releasement or letting go or opening that happens when you have this empathic listening. You're really feeling with compassion. There's a feeling with this other person, where you're not just hearing, but your whole heart starts to move with their pain or their joy. So that's pretty good, right? That's the third level of listening, and yet there's a fourth. And the fourth level of listening we could call generative listening, where the depth of your listening and your capacity to listen is so profound and so expansive that it almost draws forth or draws out the wisdom, the guidance, the answers, the perspective from this other person, like a gravitational pull, that your inner silence, your openness of being, that listening is so profound that it invites something from them, right? Maybe like this story of kneeling down in this painful moment of anger and death, and the flowers pervading the room. Maybe that's a little bit of an example of generative listening. And here, when you listen in this way, or are listened to in this way, it's like listening someone into their own wisdom. It's not just passive anymore, but the passivity, that openness, that emptiness of listening almost flips and turns in itself to create its own pull, its own force, its own tidal pull, like the ocean pulling you into itself. And this is a capacity of listening that really is only cultivated by very, very profound people. Not necessarily mystics. You know, this could be grandma, the profundity of grandma, you know, who's just seen it all, gone through it all, and is able to just listen and allow, through this depth of listening, something generative, something starts to pull out the wisdom of their grandchild that they're listening to. And you can kind of notice whether you're engaged in this generative listening, if you feel like you're connected to the source of the depth of who you really are. And if you can notice that your sense of identity has almost shifted, like it feels like you're in deep meditation. So these are 4 levels of listening, and we're going to play with them in our own experience in a moment. And before we do and get into breakout groups, first I just want to see if there's any clarifying questions about these 4, if there was something that I didn't say clearly, or if anything might need to be clarified. And then I want to bring in the political dimension a little bit. So first, any clarifying questions? Do you get a sense of the difference of these different 4 levels of listening?
I have a question. Sometimes when I'm listening to Mozart's music, it's like puts me in a meditation. Is that the kind 4th level that you're talking about?
I don't know. It could be.
Hmm.
It could be. What do you think?
It feels like it.
Yeah, well then I would trust that and explore it and really let go into that. I also am a music lover, and there are kinds of music that feel like they take me over almost, and allow this releasing into listening, into the depth of listening. So maybe that's like a beautiful friend or handhold to help us get a taste of this generative listening, you know, profound music.
Okay. Thanks.
Thank you.
Adam, I'm really interested in the difference between empathic and generative listening, because listening is what I do as a body worker, both with my ears when the person first comes in, and then I listen with my hands to their body and energy, etc. And I think, you know, I'm more skilled at generative listening when I'm listening from a body centered, listening to the body, because it's not a verbal thing generally.
Right.
And also, I think that I view the body as almost a child. Like when a child first comes into the world, they're fresh from the spiritual realm, and that child remains in our body throughout our lives. We just, you know, get hammered on and hammer on ourselves and don't want to see it, and etc. But it's still there. So I, as a body worker, can hear that childlike quality to the body, and I like to think of myself as an empathic listener, but or that I have empathy for this person. But I'm really excited about that generative state. And I'm wondering if I can bring, wondering aloud, if I can bring that quality of bodywork listening, where I know there is no space, there is no time, there's only now. If I can bring that into my ear listening and my presence listening.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, so thank you for that delineation, that, that extra. And wait, there's more, It's great.
Right. Yeah, well, that's a beautiful aspiration. How can that somatic, non-conceptual listening also pervade your listening to another person in a more social interaction? That's a beautiful aspiration, and I'm sure you can, and I'm sure there's a way to do that. Yeah. The funny thing about the fourth stage of listening is I don't think it takes a lot of work, or that it's a big intentional project, but maybe less is more. That when we're not trying so hard, and we're not trying to even help or fix or find the right way, that listening might be the most primordial, natural, and easy mode of listening. It's like getting out of our own way, and then something starts to happen that's really not the result of our will or control or intention. What's going on for you, Dana? Dana?
I was just remembering something from my childhood that I felt like maybe the first time I really felt like I experienced generative listening. And it wasn't anything that I was probably about 4, and I was in this daycare that I was horrible, and I had to eat the vegetable soup, so they shamed me and they put me outside, and all the other children were eating cake, this white cake, and I was just crying. And one of the cafeteria ladies snuck out, and she sat down beside me, and she just put her arm around me and put a piece of cake in my lap. There was no words, but it still moves me. It was a simple act of kindness. So I often think that the generative listening, maybe not much, you don't say much. Maybe it has to do with not really saying anything, but the other person somehow feels heard, really feels heard and loved by whatever it is.
Yeah. Maybe the fifth level of listening is cake. Something about cake. Yeah. And Lewis, are you with us?
Yes. Can you hear me?
We can.
Yeah. Yes, I am with you.
Great.
Listening.
Beautiful. Well, we're going to now move into some breakout groups. And this is going to be a kind of more interactive opportunity to explore our relationship with these 4 levels of listening. So Christina is set to get us into pairs, and you're ready to do that. I'll explain what we're going to do as a listening practice. So this will be 20 minutes, and will be a practice of both speaking and listening. And everyone will have a chance to both speak and listen. So we're going to, there'll just be 2 of us. And for 10 minutes, we're going to invite one partner, whoever would like to go first, you can choose, together. One person is going to speak openly about a question. And the question is, what is something that feels broken or blocked in our country right now with regard to listening to one another? And I'm going to put that in the chat. It's a bit of a mouthful, but everyone should be able to see that in the chat. What is something that feels blocked or broken in our country right now with regard to listening to one another? It's not just one thing, but you'll have 10 minutes to explore all the things or aspects that feel blocked or broken in our country right now with regard to listening to one another. So it's just very open. How is listening blocked in our country right now, in terms of being able to hear and listen to one another? So one person is going to have 10 minutes to just explore that in whatever way you'd like, from your own experience, from the media, from your families, from yourself, whatever that is. And then the other partner is going to practice with self-reflexively looking at or listening to your own listening, right? Sometimes in non-dual teachings, we talk about awareness aware of itself. Well, here listening will listen to itself. So as this other person is talking about their experience of the blockages of listening, what you will be doing when you're the listener role is just listening to this other person. We won't be speaking. We won't be responding. We won't be adding or contributing. We're just a witnessing presence of open listening. And while you're listening, notice as you move through these 3 or 4 levels of listening, right? There will be moments where you're basically distracted. They'll say something and you'll think of something and you'll miss the next 2 minutes of what the person said. So then you'll notice, I'm in the first level of listening. I'm basically not tuned in at all. And that will happen. That's fine. Just notice that. And then you might notice, I'm now in this kind of in the second level of listening because I'm actually just disagreeing or agreeing or sorting for whether they're right or wrong. Like, this person is really speaking the truth that I also see. That's like a second level of listening. And then you might notice a third level of listening, of really feeling, and wow, I really can I'm almost transparent, and I just am listening and hearing and feeling this other person as they speak. And then maybe you might even notice this fourth level of generative listening, that something in you is starting to open up to invite their own wisdom. And then, of course, as you're speaking, you might also be noticing how you're feeling in terms of the other person's listening and the quality of their attention. That's something else I wanted to mention, that often we think of listening as just you're listening or you're not, but there's also a quality or a style of listening that we can cultivate, learning to listen with these different styles of these different levels. So you're just practicing and just noticing. And then we'll come back after this 20 minutes and just share a little bit about our experience, what we learned, what we saw, what that was like. Just one thing that I know from leading these often, it's sometimes very uncomfortable to just listen to someone. We're kind of socialized to want to affirm them or agree or something. And that's okay. Just notice that and just be there. You can laugh and nod. You don't have to be a robot. But we're really just leaving space for someone else to speak. Is that more or less clear? So it'll be 10 minutes for each person, so a total of 20 minutes. And I think we'll see each other back after this process.
So we just had a wonderful exercise that Adam gave us, and Adam, I'm going to bring it back to you to see what would you like to do with that after we've all participated.
Yeah, I think Fitzhugh is going to kind of host us in this harvest a bit. So I think the only thing I'll say is when we're in a group like this, it's always really good to practice listening collectively, which means recognizing, if we've already had a chance to speak, to maybe leave room for others and just see how much space we're taking up. But in a nice, small, intimate group like this, it'd be great to hear from everyone. So yeah, over to you, Fitzhugh.
Thank you. Sure. And the only thing I'll add to Adam's words is kind of like we may call them like agreements about sharing is that we as actually I don't know if Dana did this on purpose earlier, but like using I statements to kind of like move from speaking vaguely about what we experienced or thought or said, but actually sharing from our own experience and leaving the experience of our partner to share for them. So in that sense, really not sharing something that they offered unless they share it themselves, and then that can become part of the conversation for all of us. But this is just a nice reminder to kind of like I call this like sharing hygiene, right? To be kind of just like, no, I'm going to talk about what I said. And that's really it. To Adam's point about the kind of space and time, I think of that really in terms of concision, which is how we speak is part of how we listen, right? So if we can be, not curt but efficient the way we use words, that's actually quite a blessing. So please, yeah, well, I'll open the space for others to share what it was like to speak and listen.
I just noticed I thought I was going to talk about this topic of where we're broken with a lot of anger because I do feel the frustration emotionally. But I noticed that as I was looking inside myself to describe how I feel about it or how I see things happening, it was a lot softer. And maybe just experiencing different kinds of listening in this workshop right now is influencing me, and it is coming from a softer part of myself. So it had a different, I had a different approach to the topic and a different, even though I still felt some of the strength of tightness inside of myself with some of the, and observed that I was really focusing on the negative, that my tempo of processing this at the same time allowed me to be less aggressive than how I would normally be on this kind of topic. And it also allowed me to express some of the more intimate feelings, which are the pain and the longing for connection, which is in a broken country.
I'm happy to share briefly. I there was a time in my life when I did a lot of these dyads, often hosted by Adam, and it's been a long time, so it was a little funny for me to, particularly after having, I think we spent about an hour and over an hour settling into the body, and then hearing about the modes of listening, the levels of listening, and then kind of noticing when I was like where I was kind of dropping in and out. Um, I have to admit it was hard not to feel a little self-judgmental, at times, kind of peeking through and just notice, oh, I wasn't actually listening for a moment, and there's a voice that maybe a lot of us have, right? That's like, particularly as a Buddhist, where you're like, so then you want to drop down. That feels a little better, right? So I noticed that funny kind of play, the kind of theater of that, as I was trying to really pay attention to the words. And I was curious about, like, there are a lot of places in my life, my work life, but also in kind of doing nonprofit organizing with people in my community, where I really have to make sense of what they're saying. It's part of feeling heard, right? Like, you really want to make sense and attend to the content of what you're saying, so that I need to act on it in some way, right? I need to like do something to show the person that I've heard them. And I was curious about, like, well, where is that? Where is that inside of the three levels? Like, this kind of like operating from what someone is saying. And so there was some curiosity there. And speaking about this topic was also interesting. It's a little bit out of my wheelhouse, because I think many years ago, as an adult, I decided to just do the work that makes the most sense to me. I mean, politically, and I don't really think much about what's broken or not working, or because I'm in something that works with my friends and my neighbors, and I make sure I just like give energy to that. So it was interesting to kind of pull back and say, like, oh well, what's hurting for me? What am I feeling about this kind of bigger situation? So yeah, it was quite a cool opportunity, all things said.
I'd like to share something. It's kind of interesting when there's a really safe space to speak, and the other person is just going to listen and not going to come back with or interrupt or give advice, all that. It's a very, I feel like it's kind of a resonant space that doesn't normally exist, because sometimes I feel like we have to rush, like, I gotta get my thing in before the other person jumps in, but if you really feel like, okay, it's a respectful space, it's a sacred space, and I really, really can speak. And then something happens to me. I actually am listening to myself speak. So there's part of me saying it's truth, and then there's another part. It's almost like there's more saying, oh, and so I can hear myself speak. And often you think, oh, I hope that person can hear himself speak saying that stupid stuff, and they'll finally realize, well, I hear myself speak saying stuff too. And guess what? What came out of this was my intolerance with people that have these offensive political views to me is often a fear for the relationship, that I cannot continue to love or respect that person if that person holds that opinion that I find really offensive and untrue. And that maybe that's the place I need to go to, to hopefully get towards these listening types of empathic and generative, that I really need to pay attention to my own private Idaho in there, part that's afraid of loss.
Yeah, I didn't really talk about my experience of listening. And yeah, I could hear myself discriminating and thinking, yes, that agrees. I agree with that. Yes, I can confirm that. But it moved further when I was hearing some new ideas that opened up. Oh, that's another area, spaces, small groups of people that can learn to listen. Just the way it was said put a different picture in my mind and felt more hopeful. And yeah, I did some emphasis on looking at the breathing, the posture, how can I relate to that? It played a role in how I was listening, and I did feel a connection that was more heartfelt than just a academic, these ideas are good or these ideas I don't agree with or whatever. So it's a helpful exercise to have this chance to just observe my own listening.
Out of one more thing, I think often my conversations take the form of one person says, I'm having this dilemma or this problem, and the other person says, well, let me offer to help in this way, or here's my bit of advice. There's this thing, and it's a caring human thing, and it's very natural. But I think some people like me can really overdo that. And often someone doesn't want advice. That's not a kind thing. It's not even a respectful thing. And knowing when to say nothing, or just to, that can be extremely respectful, I think, to say, oh, yeah, that's heavy, and then it can just stay there and resonate with the person more, I think, right? If you all you do is you listen, and so I guess I think I'm thinking that for me to try to move towards that generative listening is to perhaps say much less, maybe say nothing, and try to just be, embody to the best I can, someone who has heard and respects them as a human. And wants them to be well and happy. Yeah. It's like, may you be well and happy, and say that inside yourself to the person. And I don't necessarily know how you're going to be well and happy. I wish that for you. They got to figure it out, right? Yeah.
I was saying to Adam earlier, I notice myself, because I'm very extroverted. I'm a performer, I'm extroverted. I'm about engaging, and I'm doing a lot of this and a lot of yeah. The llama sounds, we call them in my household. In case you didn't know, llamas make those sounds too. Maybe they're listening. So I noticed that when I'm speaking to somebody in the room here, I really rely on those sounds and those head nods or those indications that I am being heard. And just in this little group here, where we give each other the space and the silence, I just watch myself thinking, oh, I talked too much already. I shouldn't say anything. Nope, I want to say something. Or, so I notice that. I also notice discomfort with just the quiet. Because although I know how to be still and I value quietude, that conversational part of me, that give and take, is very trained to expect input to what I just said in the form of and to want to offer, as Dana was saying, offer advice or offer my hit on something. So it's really cool, actually, to be the speaker and to have all these witnessing presences. So thank you, as you're witnessing me now. And it's really hard for me to provide that. And I'm just noticing that about myself.
Thank you all so much for sharing in this way. It's beautiful to hear, Christina. It's really lovely. And my dad hasn't spoken much, if at all, so I'd love to extend an invitation for him to share what that dyad was like before we move on. And if you don't feel like sharing, Dad, that's cool too.
I enjoyed myself with Dana. I enjoy listening to lots of people these days. And as I told her, I asked her to go first because I get plenty of opportunities to listen to myself. So, but I guess beyond that, I mean, Dana could speak to what she heard from me. What is there to say about listening? What is there to say about being quiet? Now, I've been through many iterations of this over the years in my training as a priest and being around churches in the time of the Second Vatican Council, ecumenical movement, all this kind of thing. And people were always big on talking about listening. And it used to be that you were encouraged to say so, to to go, because it meant you were paying attention to the other person. That's how I had it explained to me. So we've gone the whole round in my career, in my life, of listening, of what does it mean, and so on and so forth. And I said, and it's probably worth you all hearing this, that the moments of most profound listening that I had or have had in my life was when I had people in confession, and I was really trying to listen to what troubled their souls, because that's why they came to confession. And I think that many Americans have troubled souls nowadays. Many people in the world do. And the more that we listen and are really there companioning with them, saying to them that we are with them in their suffering, bear witness to it, say it and listen, we help take the burdens off of many people. And those burdens at times can just dissolve almost. And so, yeah, that's where I am right now.
Thank you so much.
Well, thank you all for being here today, and us listening to each other. I think it's for me, it's very profound.
Feels as though we've looped in a really beautiful way already, even just within the past hour. Because I know that someone opened the space asking about loneliness and asking about like feeling unheard. And Dad, you've just pointed out implicitly that the kinds of connections that we make when we listen to one another, and how the burden of loneliness can be lifted so easily and so gracefully when we are with someone who really hears us. On that note, I want to just kind of recap. We're coming up on one mountain, and Adam and I do want to spend maybe another 20 minutes together, if that sounds good. But before we do that, because we're gonna kind of, I want to kind of like put a bow on everything that we've done until this point, which has been really deep and beautiful and actually simple in a lot of ways, right? We've introduced some new ideas, but it's quite basic. And partially, I just know that it's helpful for me when someone readdresses the kind of like thesis points or the main kind of pillars of something like this. So when we've talked about listening, we've talked about softness, talked about curiosity, receptivity. We've talked about not knowing and how important that is. Talked about the role of safety, feeling safe. And we've talked about here and there about the ways in which anger, our mind, our discursiveness, our own ideas, when we're in a space of real generative and empathic listening, just kind of peters out, right? And opens into something new and beautiful and vulnerable. And knowing that intuitively, we've talked without saying the word, I think, we've talked about the role of love in listening. Listening as an act of love and deep compassion. Now, Adam and I want to talk a little bit about, we want to maybe introduce some slightly challenging ideas, maybe not so challenging, about what we're listening to. right now inside of contemporary American society. Adam and I have been working together for quite a long time now, it feels to me. And these are subjects that come up for us. They're perennial, just constantly, for over 13 years. And so when we kind of arrange them to talk with others about them, to share our thoughts with others when asked, I kind of have like three dimensions of like what it is we feel is being heard, of what structures and holds us right now inside of American society. With regard to listening, we might also call that like the three dimensions of what we're listening to right now, without even knowing it, right? The first of these is what's being called the attention economy. Second is the kind of socio-economy of this country right now, the globe, but most intensely in this country. And then the last one, Adam actually addressed at the outset, which is this kind of human-centeredness of our listening. These three facets are the attention economy, socioeconomy, and anthropocentrism is the word we use for this. So I'll let Adam kick us off, and we'll kind of kick it back and forth for a little while here before we close.
Thanks, Fitzhugh. Yeah, so the attention economy. A few years ago, a good friend of ours was at a conference, and someone in the audience remarked that the next great war on this planet is the war that will be fought for our attention. Our attention. And that turned out to be true. That right now we are in a digital and information economy where what is most valuable are the minutes or seconds that our eyeballs and our focus is attentive to advertising, media, news reports. And that means that some of the greatest minds of our generation are spending their time thinking about how do we hook people's attention and keep our attention focused on consumption or information or advertising or really anything that will capture us. So this is explicit. This is not just a kind of sideline theory. This is what many people go to business school to learn, what psychology is now being used for. There are many, many brilliant researchers who are trying to understand how much dopamine is released when our mind is focused on a certain consumer product or the anticipation of something pleasurable. All of that through the media and social media technologies on our smartphones and our computers. And this extends in all directions where there is this sense of an economy based on our attention. So what this means, I think, is that it's increasingly more difficult to do nothing, to just let be. Because there's always something in our pocket or our computer or something on a screen that could potentially be informational, pleasurable, could lead us to buy something or to reconfirm our political perspective. So there's a wonderful book called How to Do Nothing by Jenny Odell. And it speaks a lot about the attention economy. And she gives the example of, how in Oakland, California, almost all the great oaks from which the city of Oakland gets its name, almost all of those oaks have been cut down, many, many years ago for timber, deforested. And there are two famous oak trees left. One is right in front of the city council building. And then the other is a tree that people call the grandfather, or sometimes, I think, yeah, often known as the grandfather. And this tree is basically has survived because it's useless. It's so curved and crooked and gnarled that the timber industry were like, forget that tree. Where all the useful trees, they were cut down. And I think that there is an art that we all need to relearn of how to be useless, to not be productive, to not be efficient, to not sell our attention towards the constant kind of marketing and branding and buying and consuming. And politics comes into this as well. So there's a lot to say about this, but I think the main thing is just pointing it out that if we're interested in listening and cultivating listening, then we have to be aware that that listening is taking place within something that keeps us often nervous, busy, and impatient. Right? There's a collective cultural impatience with anything that's slow and nuanced and demands that we think. So much of the media that we hear about, whether it's on the left or the right, are like these quick, agitated sound bites. Look at this thing that they're saying on MSNBC. Look at this thing they're saying on Fox News. Look at what the left is saying, what the right is saying. And there's very little nuance or vast perspective on either side. And that's not just because that people are not nuanced. It's because the very form of this attention economy operates in order to lend itself to these quick, kind of impatient perspectives. There's a corporate platform that wants to buy and sell our attention and to optimize our attention as much as possible. So how do we become useless like this old oak tree? How do we let go of the speed? And maybe important for any of us who do meditation or little retreats like this, I think we can think of meditation or workshops or retreats as like a break, a refuge, a kind of retreat that we can pull back from the attention economy and the speed and get a break. But we do that to replenish it, then we go back into it. And I think that's not sufficient anymore, these little breaks or islands of retreat. But we actually have to be more radical and think, how do we transform not just the island, but the ocean? That the very culture we're swimming in, that we refuse this attention economy. So let me pass it back to you, Fitzhugh, and see what you're thinking.
Thank you. I'll continue that thought by saying that there's simply very few rewards or incentives inside of our contemporary culture for listening, right? And so it's up to us to design those rewards and incentives into the groups and communities that we want to be a part of and that we care about. And so this may be family, it may be extended family, it may be a sangha, it may be a small group of friends. But fostering that slowness, that nuance, so that listening becomes part of the culture of these places and spaces we're in is so crucial and such a subverting force with regard to this. What I would call like the spiritual obstacles inherent in attention economy. Moving on from that, I think it's important to look at, there's a lot of eyes on this idea of attention economy now in the kind of hyper speed or the warp speed of media because of social media and because of big tech, right? But there's a longer history to how we are shaped inside of this culture. Things don't simply happen for no reason. They happen for very particular reasons around, right, patriotism, nationalism, profit creation, ideas about individuality. But it's very difficult for us to see this air we're breathing, right? As difficult as it is for a fish to see the water in which it swims. But let me give an example, because I know probably all of us here are paying very close attention to the war in Ukraine. And we may be aware that many people in Russia, I think someone may know this statistic better than me, but Adam said yesterday it's somewhere between 70 and 80% of the Russian population supports the war in Ukraine. And the reason we're told that they support it, I'm sure there's some amount of the population that supports it out of like kind of blind nationalism, but there are quite a lot of people in Russia, like us, who are being fed a media diet by the Russian regime, predicated specifically on understanding the Ukrainian war in very particular ways. That's all they see. Because of internet blackouts, because of the difficulty of seeing and encountering other media outside of the country, Western media, they have no other way to experience the war, and so they take on trust, essentially, that the government is telling them the truth. And we see that in this country and feel maybe some kind of pity for those people. I do. I feel like, oh, these are probably people with whom I could connect really deeply, but they are trapped, right? They're being trapped by a narrative that's being spun for them. Now, you may see where I'm going with this, but this is very much the way we feel about our right-wing neighbors as well, right? They're being trapped by a kind of false narrative that has been spun for them and continues to profit from their misunderstandings by Rupert Murdoch and Fox News and the kind of entire web apparatus that has sprung up around that, Breitbart, Facebook, Cambridge Analytica, so on. And I agree with all of that. It's like really, it's very troubling. And it's important for us to turn that, for pity to become compassion, to become all accommodating compassion, not only for those who we feel or see clearly are trapped by delusion, but also to ask ourselves, what is shaping us? What is shaping us in terms of the media we encounter, in terms of the stories that we believe and tell ourselves about our neighbors, in terms of the kind of education we've been allowed to have in this country, or things to which we have exposed ourselves. What kind of innocence and ignorance still exists in our lives, willfully or not. And so this practice of seeing how enmeshed we are inside of basically regimes of control in this country, this too is a meditation practice. This too is a contemplation. It's over 2,000 years old, right? Seeing like basically, how am I? What are the socio-political dimensions of my suffering? Why do I understand myself the way that I do, such that it's very difficult for me to interact with family when they talk about the disaster in their life? Because these stories, as we know, they become a house of mirrors and make it very difficult for us to encounter people in a bare, vulnerable, basic human way. But as we've seen, when we can drop beneath that, or at the very least be honest about what's happening as it's happening, something shifts in the relationship right then. And that person is invited into something new. take us maybe into something a little even newer, I'd love for Adam to close us out by talking about the more than human world.
Yeah, thank you. Before I turn towards the more than human, just preparing for today, I was trying to understand and educate myself a bit more about how these forms of technology that Fitzhugh mentioned and the kind of sociocultural context that we're in, how does that really operate? And I found something very helpful to me from a Stanford Law School professor named Nate Persily. And he wrote a book called, it was a co-editor of a book called Social Media and Democracy, The State of the Field, Prospects for Reform. I'll put that in the chat. And what's his name? He has just a nice little helpful tool here, which he says, what exactly threatens our democracy from technologies and from the socio-economic context that we're in? And he talks about 3 V's. What threatens our democracy through the forms of social media and technology are: 1 V is velocity, the sheer speed at which information and disinformation circulate. So the velocity of it, the speed of it. The second V is the virality, right? They're viral, which means that they're peer-to-peer, that someone says something, someone else picks that up and it spreads horizontally, which is interesting because that sounds very democratic in the sense that there is no control, right? It wasn't that long ago that it was like 3 white men that determined the news for the whole country based on, the major news reports. Now it's millions of people are determining the news. That's because of the viral nature of how information is spread. So on the one hand, that sounds very democratic and horizontalized, less top down, but it's led to probably the greatest threat to democracy because people are there's no trust of where information is coming from. And like Fitzhugh was saying, we often tend to look at others with that mistrust and don't reflect back and look to the sources of where our information is coming from. We have our stance and we assume everybody else is crazy. And so what does it mean to have a critical reflexivity and understand where exactly is where our perspective is coming from? And again, not just the content, but the actual form of these technologies. So there's velocity, there's virality, and the virality appeals to outrage. It appeals to anything that really upsets you. Your eyes, your attention will feed that. You will click on the next thing. So the way YouTube works is if you watch videos on a certain genre or are interested in certain products, then the computer will pop those suggestions up on your YouTube feed. And I think a lot of us treat that as if it's neutral. It's not. It's specifically catered to reinforce the perspectives and habits we already had. So if we go back to that habitual mode of listening, we have technologies whose sole purpose is to reconfirm those habits and to not let us outside of them. That's the design of these artificial intelligent bots. They're made to do that, and they're very good at it. And the more outraged we are, the more we stay within that habitual silo. So velocity, virality, and the third is the volume, just the sheer amount that if you do try to really look at your sources or follow something down the rabbit hole, it's almost endless, because in our pockets is more information than any ancient library throughout the history of the world. So there's such a volume of information, it's very difficult to navigate and it's very difficult to have sense making. So our country is fragmented, the world is polarized, because the technology is designed to split us and polarize us. And these things happen very quickly and sometimes without us knowing. So now even, somebody mentioned Hannity on Fox News, or let's say Rachel Maddow on MSNBC. When they are speaking the news and doing a news report, no longer are they interested solely in their live audience, but really what they're looking for are things that are short sound bites that will then be circulated in the media the next day or the next week. And those are clicked on millions of times. And that's where they generate the most revenue for their advertising and marketing. It's not the live news show anymore. So nobody designed this exactly. It's just kind of proliferates and happening. And the end result is this incredible threat to the whole structure of our politics. That might not be a bad thing, though. We'll have to see. The last thing I will say here is, what is it in particular about Google and Facebook? Well, right now, Google and Facebook alone have more power over the information ecosystem than any institution since the pre-Reformation Catholic Church. Just between Google and Facebook, they hold and define what is information and truth. So we've entered into a very different world, and how do we learn to listen and navigate that world is really what we're asking for and we're asking about. And before I shift to the more than human, Fitzhugh, did you want to add anything to just that little thing I said?
First of all, I'm very thankful that you brought some of that kind of hard research in. I have a couple of friends who work in this field, and I'm always astounded to hear what they have, what they're showing up with as professors. And I want to say, because I felt the kind of pain of your first question, Dana, about like, how do you sit with someone who believes a lie, particularly when that belief is self-harming, right? And I'm afraid to say I don't know, right? But what I do know is that outrage is a poison. It's a poison, it's a toxin that drives clicks within our current media sphere. If you're outraged, you're more likely to share. You're more likely to engage, comment, right? Make your own video to upload, and that's, And so when we think about listening, and we think about the practices epitomized by someone like Thich Nhat Hanh, it's just the total opposite of outrage. It is cooling, it is healing, and so it's empathy, right? It's this empathic listening. It is this generative listening of being with someone and seeing if there's love there, if there's a desire to be in a relationship, to continue in building something with someone, which there isn't always, right? Is actually what we realize. But if there is, then bringing this healing medicine of listening into something like that can really open up something genuine. And that's their work, right? That's work that we cannot do for them. It's work that we can witness. It's work that we can do with them. And it has to be, and there has to just be a sense of complete surrender to the process of the other person. That's been my personal experience. And then a real openness to sadness, being like, well, they're kind of lost in that, and I'm sad, really, really sad about that, and being with them in that loss. So this is something that social media hasn't yet, less I'll say yet, but hasn't figured out how to co-opt yet. These genuine, deep, nuanced human experiences with one another. In fact, it exists to replace that, to replicate that in some kind of cursory fashion, but it can't be that. It can't listen, right? So I'd love for Adam to take us forward into what this kind of genuine experience, how that manifests outside of human to human interaction.
So all day today, we've been exploring listening to ourselves, our own bodies, listening to others, listening to now the socioeconomic and technological reality. And of course, in that attention, what we have not been listening to or not really been exploring is the vastness of this earth and this cosmos that really isn't about human beings. And if there's been, ever been a time in history on this planet where we need to listen to the world beyond just the humans or the anthropocentric perspective, it's today, because it is the human animal, and not just all human animals, but usually a very specific subset of human animals, mostly in the United States, in parts of China and parts of Europe, that we are driving a transformation on this planet in terms of global warming, extinction, habitat loss, toxicity. Fitzhugh and I are living 50 miles away from where the train derailed in East Palestine, spreading, vinyl chloride and into our air, into our water. And we often have no agency really in even having a say whether we want to live in such a toxic ecosystem. So how do we listen to the birds? How do we listen to the trees and the root systems and the moss and the scrub brush and the last remaining wild animals that are still free? How do we listen to the changing biosphere? How does the depth of our listening not just extend to other humans or humans that maybe have a different political perspective? And when you open to the earth, suddenly these polarized left and right type of divisions actually might seem much less significant in some way. Oftentimes people who, astronauts, when they come back to the earth, they have this almost spiritual experience of seeing, wow, we're all in this one biosphere. And our media, our form of life, and our society tend to really capture us in just a human-centric perspective. And so our listening really needs to become a kind of cosmopolitics that invites all life and even non-life, mountains, rivers, things that we might not think of as alive. They're alive. They're a player in our political world and in our reality. And we need to listen much better in our society and open that listening and that sensing to the richness of this beautiful earth. What else would you say, Fitzhugh?
No, that was gorgeous. I think we can. Yeah, thank you.
Well, we've been on for a long time, and I think Fitzhugh and I wanted to end with just a few kind of provocations almost to explore here and to take into your life. And maybe we could close if we could just each go around and you could just share something of what you're currently feeling or thinking, and then we'll bow out and enjoy this beautiful world and listen. So maybe we could just go around. I'll call on you, Connie, if you're willing to share something first of what you're feeling.
I'm just aware once more that we are alive and we're surrounded in life. These are parts of, we are all part of a living organism. And it spreads all the way out to the cosmos. I'm really taking that in. And that's a call for silence and silent time, because that's not happening in the media. It's some sort of an animal, I guess. but there's so much more. And I'm just pulling that one in right now, taking it in. And it's a positive, powerful thought and awareness. Listening.
Really beautiful. Thank you, Connie. And Lewis, what about you? What's in your heart?
The sound of water. I'm just listening. I'm bearing witness to all of you guys. Look, human beings are thinking creatures. Anytime we talk to each other, because we're creatures of language, it's going to be quite natural that we process and that we want to respond and do all of this. For instance, I was listening to some click languages from Africa, which were supposedly amongst the first ever spoken. And then I listened the other night, because of this silly Wakanda Forever, I listened to some Yucatec Maya. And Yucatec Maya has clicks in it also, which I found fascinating. And it's not really hard to make the clicks, but this is this communication, almost like we're trying to make bird song or song for each other. Here I am, as we proceed in this journey with each other. And so for me, and I think I might have said something to Dana about it, a lot of listening is where I just turn everything off. I really do. I love human language, and I really get tired of it too, especially when I just hear all the yakking that goes on in media. So what I've learned is turn it off, and I'll listen to something else. I'll either listen to the white noise here in our bedroom, or I'll listen to water. I have sometimes really been aware of, I think, of feeling, which is what a lot of deaf people do. I've been learning some ASL, and because of the medication I take, I have sometimes a bit of hearing loss now. It's periodic. But you touch, you feel sound with vibration. And so I feel the Schumann resonance sometimes and listen to it simultaneously. I feel / listen. And that's where I am now. I'm being aware of listening and aware of my own awareness, which is really kind of a fun pool to lie on my back in and look at the beautiful sky and feel the water on me. So it's marvelous. Contemplation of blueness and coolness.
Thank you for bringing in the water.
Sure.
How about you, Dana? What's happening for you?
Oh, so much. I want to take this opportunity to tell you that this has been one of the most powerful things I've participated in years. And I do a lot of stuff like this. So you guys are excellent. And I thank you so much. And I'm a note taker because my memory's not the best. And you've given me so much to think about from here on out. I think it's made me very committed to trying to repair my attention span and to foster it and to stretch it, and to every day that attention span. And I think I'm kind of conflating listening and attention span, the ability to listen, right? And the ability to listen has to do with the ability to respond wisely, and sometimes the wise response is nothing. And I keep thinking about my very practical question, like I'm going to go on a trip with this relative, and I think when she brings up Sean Hannity, I'm going to say, I love you deeply, I respect the hell out of you. When you talk about him, it breaks my heart. I can't go there, so let's leave that aside. And I'm just gonna give up Yeah, because I'm powerless, really, to fix that in her. She's got to fix that in herself. And me sparring about, and like what you just said, Fitz, you really helped me. If I start putting my outrage into it, that just feeds that ugly beast. It doesn't calm it. So I guess really powerlessness to do other people's work for them, but at the same time, the great healing that can come from my just being able to listen, if I can get there, if I can achieve that, which it's a huge thing to achieve, to listen well. And then I keep thinking of this Thich Nhat Hanh thing you probably all read about the pine tree. And the, you know, an activist was saying, I'm like, my heart is broken. I don't know what to do about the world and this and that. And Thich Nhat Hanh says, you're trying too hard. You need to go back and take care of yourself. Look at the pine tree. The best way the pine tree can help the world is by being the most beautiful, healthy pine tree it can be. And then so other people seeing the healthy, beautiful pine tree will be healed just by the sight of the pine tree and being, you know, knowing that it's healthy. And so, yeah, I think it's, you know, we kind of have to come from a place of being if we want to somehow do that generative listening. And the being part is not easy. That takes a whole lot of practice every day, every day, every day. You know, really, really working on all the conditioning that can get in the way, but like really being aware of, do we have a root that we can come from? And can we find that root, especially when someone is just praising Sean Hannity? You know, like how to find that root. Yeah. So really, thank you. I mean, you really have, I think you've helped me. I think you may have helped save that relationship. And I was a bit worried about it. So thanks.
Thank you. And Christina, what's happening for you?
Well, you may recall that I said that it's hard for me to just, you know, I'm good at speaking. I like to speak and I like to be heard. It's hard for me to listen to other people. Well, I shouldn't say that. I'm really good at it in one respect. There are ways in which I could be, I could embrace that pervasive vastness of which you spoke. And yet I find myself thinking, oh, I could create a monthly listening forum. We could all just listen to each other once a month. I'm still trying to kind of fix the world. And yeah, so that's okay that I'm that way. It's okay that I love humanity. It's okay that I want to do something for humanity. And at the same time, can I learn even more to step back and say, maybe, you know, give space to my own, listen to myself, give space to my own talking, my own plans, and say to myself, oh, I hear that you're interested in starting a monthly listening forum. Tell me more about that. You know? Yeah, so many little things have occurred in this workshop that have been really obviously great to my mind. I say, yes, I recognize, that's wonderful. And then other things, like a word here, a phrase there, a concept, my mind says, what? I can't hold that. I can't grok that yet. So it's going to take me some space and some time that I will allow myself to look at my notes and like be useless. I'm going to contemplate being useless. Thank you, Adam. Yeah, these wonderful concepts that have taken what I knew before and just really deep dive into a more profound way to listen. So thank you very much. Thanks to everyone here who has contributed so much. It's been a great workshop.